The Pennsylvania Railroad Q2 was the more successful but less well-known sibling of the infamous T1. The PRR built 26 of these massive 4464 Duplex freight engines between 1944 and 1945. They were some of the largest and most powerful locomotives ever built. While the Q2s avoided the wheel slip issues that plagued the T1s, they all left service by 1951, a year before the T1s, replaced by both diesels and smaller, more economical steam engines. This project actually joins separate threads from my 5AT and T1. When I first started building scale trains, I only considered two discrete drivetrain options: fast with no torque using the train motors, and slow with torque using geared motors. I did not think it was possible to get moderate speed with moderate torque, especially with the added friction of a geared drivetrain. The 5AT build proved otherwise. It could move quite quickly on a single L motor, and it could pull more than a single train motor. On the flip side, the T1 tender ran slower despite having two L motors, possibly dinged by both gear ratio and drivetrain complexity. I had thought about rebuilding the entire model and moving the motors from the tender to the locomotive, but before embarking on that journey, I wanted to see if I could replicate the performance of the 5AT in a larger design. Doing a Q2 for R104 seemed like the perfect opportunity. Like with the UP8080, I mostly designed while on vacation with little physical prototyping, but I did test one important and complicated thing: the running gear. I had a hard time simply mounting the rear cylinders due to the limited space between the second and third drivers. This limits fixture options and feature size, especially as the chassis articulates in turns. Consequently, I also lack the space to implement my usual sliding tile driving rods. Instead, I used the sliding pin trapped between two rods, which I had not used since the X10A. This actually adds one more complication to the rear cylinder mounting. The bars need to align with the captive pin at the 8-wide position. I solved this weird offset using rods and clips. The implementation makes the max width of the chassis 9-wide, but the significantly smaller QJ also has 9-wide cylinders. Before ordering parts from Bricklink, I also did a structural mechanical test of the drivetrain and frame, but I did not test peripheral constructs like the cab windows and running boards, because I knew those would be fragile. I intended to recycle parts from the T1 for this build, but I ultimately could not get much. The construction of the two seemingly related engines differed a ton due to the temporal and philosophical gap between the two models. That being said, I think the Q2 turned out very well aesthetically. I would consider it my best model since the 1928 D2, and that says a lot. I don't like the shoulders on the running boards that much, but I don't have a better solution at the moment. I also like the cab window less and less. I saw it elsewhere and it seemed like a perfect fit, but it doesn't have glass, mounting it sucks, and yellow instances cost a fortune. This design can use any modern 3-wide motors, but I intended to power it with Power Functions L motors. These drive the second and third bogies of the 4464 chassis through turntables above the first and fifth drivers, which power the rest through connecting rods. This arrangement pushes the pivots out as far as possible and limits overhang at the ends of the locomotive. Even though I built the Q2 for R104, it still has to articulate as much as the T1. The model can be hard to handle due to its huge size and fragile greebles. Furthermore, parts of the locomotive come off in order to access the internals. I put the receiver in the smoke box and the battery box in the cab, surrounding the two motors in the boiler proper. As with the QJ, the Q2 seems like it has a lot of extra volume until all the cables get involved. The body also has limited stud connections to the chassis in order to separate them for maintenance. Putting all the electronics in the locomotive complicates wiring and hurts cosmetics a bit. Powered up could mitigate those issues, as could moving some components to the tender. I messed with the former and less with the latter, though I did design affordances into the tender in case I changed my mind. Otherwise, the Q2 tender features much simpler construction than the T1 tender due to the lack of a drivetrain. The axles in the bogies neither have to slide nor articulate due to the R104 limitation, and this one time I even used stock wheel sets. These practically never work for scale models of American trains, but I needed a very thin frame over the wheel hubs, and I could cover the ugly top portion. The inset red deck in the back offsets with a very brute force construction technique. It mounts to rows of 1x1 round plates embedded between the studs below. So, after all that, how does the model actually perform? Well, it definitely does not go quite as fast as the 5AT did, and I'm not entirely sure why. Practically, the Q2 consists of two 5AT drivetrains joined back to back with the same gear ratios and stages, though the Q2 does have higher axle loadings. To further reduce friction, the power bogies don't have a mechanical connection, and the drivers don't have any rubber tires. Those design decisions caused the front drivers to run a bit faster than the rear drivers, which may also hurt performance. I will go over that investigation in a separate video since it concerns powered up more than the Q2. I will most likely make instructions once I figure out how to document the very complicated build, so keep an eye on the rebrickable. On that note, this is the end of the video. Please consider subscribing if you like what we do, and have a nice day.